So with the recent live-action Avatar The Last Airbender coming to Netflix, I thought we'd tell the story of my childhood hero, Avatar Aang. You see, Aang was an air nomad born in the year 12 BG, and was the Avatar during the 100-Year War. He followed Avatar Roku and preceded Avatar Korra. Shortly before the beginning of the 100-Year War, Aang was frozen in an iceberg for 100 years. He later emerged, still biologically 12 years old, but now in a world engulfed in war. It has fallen to Aang, the Avatar, to put an end to this war by mastering all 4 elements and defeating Fire Lord Ozai. Welcome to today's video, where we're going over the entire life of Avatar Aang and how he must gain the strength needed to put an end to the 100-Year War. Aang was born to 2 air nomads during 12 BG, and after selecting the Avatar relics from among thousands of toys confirming his identity as the Avatar, he was taken away by the monks to the Southern Air Temple. They kept his position as the Avatar a secret from him and everyone else to protect him until the day he was strong enough to protect himself. As an air nomad, Aang traveled extensively around the world during his childhood. He was raised and educated in the Southern Air Temple under the guardianship of monk Gyatso. Gyatso served as Aang's tutor and parental figure. After some time had passed, he and several other air nomads were taken away to the Eastern Air Temple, where they each would choose a Sky Bison as their lifelong companion. Aang approached his soon-to-be Sky Bison named Appa, and offered him an apple, to which Appa accepted, thus marking the start of their deep and lifelong friendship. Aang was a prodigy in the art of bending, and by the age of 6 he was already better than the teenage benders in his temple. And by the age of 10 he had already proven himself better than even his own teachers. He earned his airbending tattoos and the status as an airbending master by the age of 12. He is also known as the youngest airbending master in air nomad history. In his childhood, Aang also visited the other air temples, as evidenced by the obvious familiarity that he had with the Western air temples. Aang also visited the cities in the Earth Kingdom such as Omashu, where he developed an everlasting friendship with the good-natured and fairly crazy Bumi. But the happy childhood that he had known was approaching its end due to the signs of a possible war approaching. Aang was then told of his status as the Avatar by the age of 12, which is 4 years earlier than the traditional age of 16. Aang felt the burden of the status when the other children refused to play with him. This led to him spending more time practicing and mastering his airbending techniques with the other monks. But out of all the monks, there was only one that truly understood the extent of Aang's burden, and that was Monk Gyatso. He could understand him due to having a good friendship with Avatar Roku. He would try to help Aang through the transition of growing up by providing Aang with a balance of fun and learning. Aang later discovered that he would be sent to the Eastern Air Temple in order to complete his airbending training far away from Monk Gyatso. This was due to the other monks believing that Monk Gyatso was being too soft on Aang and failing him as his guardian. Afraid and confused, the young airbender ran away on his flying bison, but through a shocking turn of events, they found themselves caught up in a freak storm. This then caused them to crash into the water, where Aang saved himself and Appa from drowning by semi-consciously entering the Avatar state. He then froze them both in a sphere of ice through the combination of airbending and waterbending. The Avatar state would keep him alive, but in an unconscious state within the iceberg. He would remain in that ice for over 100 years as the war raged on around him. Later, Aang was found and freed from the iceberg by siblings named Katara and Sokka, 2 kids from the Southern Water Tribe. They quickly became friends and almost immediately attracted the attention of Prince Zuko, who sought to capture him on the command of his dad, Fire Lord Ozai. This led to the newly formed Team Avatar setting out to find a waterbending master for both Katara and Aang. Later, while helping get rid of a spirit that was destroying Senlin Village, Aang crossed over to the spirit world where he met Fang, the animal guide of his predecessor Avatar Roku. He was then instructed to visit the Avatar Temple on Crescent Island during the winter solstice, so he could talk with Avatar Roku. Despite the confrontation that they had with the Fire Sages, whose loyalty has turned from the Avatar to the Fire Lord, Aang managed to speak with Roku, who warned him about the impending arrival of Sozin's comet. He is also informed that this comet will grant the Fire Nation enough power to win the war. Roku urged Aang to master the 3 remaining elements before summer's end, or else nobody would ever restore the balance in the world again. When Aang was captured by Admiral Shao, Zuko came to his aid under the identity of the Blue Spirit. This was just so he could be the one to capture the Avatar and restore his honor. Aang, Sokka, and Katara continued their travels to the Northern Water Tribe while developing a tighter bond. This was also where Aang began to develop a little crush for Katara. Upon the group's arrival at the Northern Water Tribe, Aang was displeased to learn that the Water Master Pakku would not teach Katara. This was due to their law against girls learning combative waterbending techniques. She was then instructed to learn healing techniques from the other women. However, she was able to change Pakku's mind and they both began to learn from him. This period of calm was very brief as Shao showed up and commanded an attack on the Northern Water Tribe. Princess Yue then suggested to Aang that he seek the guidance of the ocean and moon spirits. He then learned through the spirit named Ko that their spirits existed in the mortal world, but their physical selves had been captured by Zuko. But fear not, as Aang's friends managed to rescue him, but not before Shao arrived and killed the moon spirit, who was the source of power for the water benders. Determined not to fail the water tribe, Aang merged with the ocean spirit and proceeded to annihilate the Fire Nation ships, winning the battle and forcing them to retreat. Aang and his friends left the north on a ship with Pakku and several others, before eventually flying to an Earth Kingdom Signal's base, where they were to be escorted to Omashu in order to start Aang's earthbending training under King Bumi. But in the end, the trio decided to travel alone as the general commanding that fortress was hell-bent on forcing Aang into the Avatar state to fight Ozai before he was ready. Upon arriving at Omashu, they learned that the city had already fallen under the Fire Nation. Seeking to save King Bumi, Aang and his friends evacuated citizens from the city in order to aid Omashu's resistance. But in the process, the governor's son, Tom Tom, managed to follow them out. Team Avatar was then sent a messenger hawk reporting that the governor would trade King Bumi for the son's safe return. But before that could happen, Princess Azula backed out of the deal, leading to a fight between Avatar and the princess's allies. While they did manage to find Bumi, he told Aang that he would not leave Omashu and encouraged him to find a master who embodied the principles of neutral Jing. Before leaving Omashu, the team returned Tom Tom safely to his family. While in the city of Gaoling, they heard of a tournament that supposedly featured the best earthbenders in the entire world. So they went into the tournament hoping to find an earthbending teacher for Aang. And at the end of the tournament, they witnessed a fight between the popular contestant and the current champion, who just so happens to be a blind girl. During the match, Aang realized that the girl was the same one he had a vision of way back in the Foggy Swamp. And he also noticed that her patient technique of waiting and listening was what led her to easily defeating her opponent. The ringmaster then offered a sack of gold pieces to anyone who dared face the blind bandit. Aang soon accepted this challenge in order to talk to the blind girl. But she continued to ignore him after he caught her off guard by deflecting her attack with airbending. The team learned that the girl belonged to the Beifong family and visited their estate, posing as a formal visit from the Avatar. However, he soon learned that the earthbender named Toph was hiding her abilities from her family. Later, when she and Aang were kidnapped, Toph managed to fight off all the attackers, revealing her skill to her parents. She would later run away from home and join Aang's team as his teacher. But due to Earth being the natural opposite to Air, Aang struggled hard to learn even the basics of earthbending. But within his first day of training, he managed to stand his ground and successfully earthbend. Later, while taking a brief vacation to the Misty Palms Oasis, the group was led to Wang Shitong's library in the middle of Siwang Desert. While there, they learned valuable information on the solar eclipse that would leave firebenders powerless. But after emerging from the library, they discovered that Appa had been captured and sold to the desert tradesmen. After meeting the kidnappers and learning of Appa's fate, an enraged Aang entered the Avatar state and destroyed all the Sand Sailors. In spite of Appa's absence, the group aimed to travel to Ba Sing Se and inform the Earth King of their newfound information. This was also so they could plan out an invasion on the Fire Nation during the solar eclipse. After finding their way out of the desert and crossing the Serpent's Pass, the group discovered a giant Fire Nation drill that was trying to penetrate the wall of Ba Sing Se. General Sung was reluctant at first to accept the group's help, but after witnessing the quick defeat of his terror team at the hands of Tai Li and Mei, he gladly accepted the Avatar's assistance. In a joint effort, the group managed to defeat Asula's team and destroy the drill. Upon reaching Ba Sing Se, Aang discovered that the city was in a state of conspiracy. You see, the true power did not lie with the Earth King, but was actually held by the Grand Secretariat Long Fang. He had complete control over the Dai Li, which is Ba Sing Se's secret police. The group then infiltrated Long Fang's secret base in Lake Laogai. They believed that he was holding Aang's bison captive there. After reuniting with Appa, they stormed the palace and informed Earth King Kui of Long Fang's betrayal. After convincing the king to arrest Long Fang, they planned for an invasion on the day of the eclipse. The king's men then searched Long Fang's office and found a message for Aang from Guru Patek. The message was a request for Aang to meet the Guru at the Eastern Air Temple, where he could learn to control the Avatar state. After journeying to the temple, the Guru helped Aang open all his chakras but one, the Thought Chakra. You see, he refused to let go of his connection to Katara after receiving a vision of her in danger. Aang reunited with Sokka and Toph, and they journeyed back to the city. There they learned that Asula, Mei, and Tai Li had already infiltrated the city. After reuniting with Katara in the Crystal Catacombs, the pair began to fight Zuko, before the arrival of the Dai Li, who had turned to the side of the Fire Nation princess. Aang successfully entered his Avatar state, but was soon struck by a lightning bolt by Asula. This severe attack rendered his 7th chakra impossible to reopen, and also mortally wounded him in his Avatar state, severing the connection of the Avatar spirit to the world, which threatened the end of the Avatar cycle. Katara then caught Aang before he fell to the ground and was able to escape thanks to Iroh's help. While escaping the city on Appa, Katara used the water from the Spirit Oasis to revive him. This also restored the connection to the Avatar spirit in turn. But Aang still remained severely injured, and for the next several weeks, Aang remained unconscious as he recovered from his injuries. Aang then awoke in the spirit world, where he underwent a long journey to reconnect with the 4 most recent incarnations in order to heal the Avatar spirit. When Aang's physical self awoke, he had no memory of his time in the spirit world and found himself aboard a Fire Nation vessel. This led him to believe that he had been captured, though he soon learned that the ship had been commandeered by Team Avatar and their allies. Upon reaching the Fire Nation, the team prepared for their invasion on the day of the eclipse, and disguised themselves as Fire Nation civilians. However, the team soon encountered a mysterious assassin that they dubbed the Combustion Man. This mysterious individual tracked them all across the Fire Nation. On the day of the eclipse, Aang, Sokka, and Toph searched for Fire Lord Ozai in an underground bunker beneath the capital, but were soon kept at bay by Asula during the entire duration of the eclipse. Realizing that the day had been lost, they retreated back to the Western Air Temple, where the team was then confronted by Zuko. He revealed that he now wishes to join their group. Initially, they rejected him, but after his help with the Combustion Man, Aang accepted Zuko as his Firebender teacher. When they discovered that Zuko had lost touch to his inner fire due to his defection, Zuko and Aang sought out the Sun Warriors to learn the original source of firebending. After undergoing a trial from the dragons Ren and Chao, Zuko and Aang were shown a new hopeful side to firebending, which also allowed the pair to greatly improve at the art. When Azula attacked the Western Air Temple, Aang and his allies were forced to flee once again. While Aang and his friends believed they could delay confronting the Fire Lord until after Sozin's comet, they soon realized that they had to battle the Fire Nation immediately when Zuko revealed that his father's plan was to annihilate the Earth Kingdom. But due to his air nomad belief in the sanctity of life, Aang felt a strong anxiety about the thought of killing Ozai. When he left for an island off the shore of Ember Island, he met a lion turtle who taught him the ways of energy bending. After learning this, Aang went to battle with the Fire Lord in Wulong Forest. Here, a sharp rock hits against his wound and allows him to enter the Avatar state once again. Although Aang was able to overpower the Fire Lord, he decided to spare Ozai's life and used his newfound powers to strip the Fire Lord of all his bending abilities. Now with the war over, Aang attended Zuko's coronation. Here, the pair vowed to bring peace to the world once again. After this, Team Avatar met with the Earth King in Ba Sing Se and initiated the Harmony Restoration Movement. This entailed the removal of the Fire Nation colonies from the Earth Kingdom. Soon after, Aang revealed his feelings for Katara and they shared a passionate kiss by the Jasmine Dragon. Later, he helped relocate many of the Fire Nation colonists. But after just 1 year, Zuko unexpectedly withdrew his support for the recolonization efforts. Confused by this, Aang and Katara traveled to Yudao where the Fire Lord and the Avatar could not come to an agreement, as Zuko regarded the oldest colonies as prosperous communities which had a right to exist, while Aang saw them as a continued threat to the balance between the four nations. Regardless, Aang and Katara pledged that they would somehow find a peaceful solution. Later in Ba Sing Se, Aang was surprised and happy to discover the official Avatar Aang fan club, a group that had devoted itself to learning the ways of the air nomads. In contrast, the meeting with Quay went poorly and the king decided to remove the colonies by force. Aang and Katara hurried back to Yudao to convince the locals to leave before a new war could begin. Faced with obstination from the colonists and the Earth Kingdom nationalists, Aang struggled to find a peaceful solution, until the chaotic Battle of Yudao erupted. Fearing that he would have to kill Zuko to prevent another war, Aang eventually concluded that there was no possible way to keep the nations apart, and that the Fire Lord was right. To this end, the Avatar stopped the battle and convinced Quay to allow the old colonies to stay as self-governing communities. He also transformed the official Avatar Aang fan club into the first Air Acolytes to revive the air nomad culture. After solving the Yudao crisis, Aang, Katara and Sokka decided to help Zuko in search for his long-lost mother, Ursa. This meant that they were forced to work with Azula, who had crucial information on Ursa's whereabouts. After a tense encounter with a wolf spirit, the group arrived in the remote village of Hurrah. There they stayed at the home of two friendly actors, Noran and Noriko, but lost track of Zuko's mother at the same time. However, the group soon learned of Ursa's ex-boyfriend Dekam, who had disappeared in the nearby Forgetful Valley. At the spiritual forest, the Avatar met with Rapha and Misu, two Water Tribe siblings who were seeking the aid of the powerful spirit known as the Mother of Faces. Aang offered his help and crossed over to the spirit world and convinced the ancient spirit to grant them one wish. Team Avatar decided to spend the spirit's goodwill to help Rapha and Misu. However, Azula interjected and took the wish for herself, causing the Mother of Faces to reveal that she had already helped Akon and Ursa to start a new life by granting them new faces, the faces of Noran and Noriko. But she also took Ursa's memories as a result. Azula promptly took off by Zuko and Sokka as Aang and Katara attempted to convince the mother to grant a second wish for Rapha and Misu. A fight ensued as the mother felt that humans were being disrespectful. While fending off the spirits, Aang accidentally blew off Rapha's mask, revealing that his face had been stolen by Ko, who was the son of the Mother of Faces. Revealing that the Avatar had once spared Ko, Aang managed to convince her to give Rapha a new face. Soon after, the spirit also restored Ursa's face and memories. Aang and his friends then accompanied Zuko, Ursa, Noran, and their daughter Ki back to the Fire Nation capital. Team Avatar then attended the remaining talks on Yudao's future, during which Aang encountered the spirit of Avatar Yang Chen, but was unable to hear what she was saying. This meeting inspired him to revive Yang Chen's festival. In the process, Team Avatar and the Air Acolytes discovered at the Earth and Fire Refinery a small settlement had been built on formerly sacred Airmad lands. Aang opposed this development, causing tensions with Toph, who advocated for change. Despite the disruption caused by the factory, the Avatar and the Air Acolytes continued to celebrate Yang Chen's festival. While doing so, a ceremonial meal acted as a conduit to allow Aang to finally connect with Yang Chen. However, an earthquake interrupted their conversation and the Avatar rushed to the Earth and Fire Refinery, where he soon learned that Katara, Toph, and several others were trapped in the mine under the factory. Aang was able to save the trapped group with the help of top students. Afterwards, the Avatar reconnected with Yang Chen and finally learned that the Yang Chen festival was set up to placate the spirit General Old Iron, who had wanted to avenge his friend Tien Hai, who he believed was killed by humans. You see, it was the factory's construction that angered him once again. When General Old Iron attacked, Aang tried to negotiate until the spirit moved to kill Toph and her students. The air nomad then deeply wounded the spirit, causing him to retreat. Aang regretted this development, feeling that General Old Iron might be right and the humans and the spirits can never coexist. However, his hope was soon restored by Lady Tianhai, who appeared and revealed that she had not been killed by humans and was actually a lover of humanity and their progressive ways. The Avatar then decided to reform Yangchen's festival into a spirit friendship festival, something that preserved the air nomad traditions while also adapting to the new ways. After solving this crisis, Aang travelled to the Fire Nation to help Zuko, who faced with alleged dark spirit attacks. The Avatar then learned that several children had disappeared, while political extremists were mobilizing against the Fire Lord. Seeking a reason for the spirit's anger, Aang, Zuko, Mei, and Kalo visited Dragon Bone Catacombs, where otherwise forgotten knowledge on the Fire Nation's past was stored. At the crypt of the first Fire Lord, the air nomad contacted a Khmer Kage spirit who informed the group that they had not returned to haunt the Fire Nation since ancient times. Accordingly, Aang reasoned that the kidnappers must have been human imposters. The next night, the fake Khmer Kage kidnapped Zuko's sister, Ki. Aang and his friends were unable to stop them, but learned that the imposters were led by Azula. The Avatar then helped locate and rescue the missing children, although the Khmer Kage escaped. Aang then travelled to the South Pole to spend some time with Sokka and Katara. While there, the Avatar had to deal with the Southern Water Tribe nationalists under Galak. They intended to overthrow Hakoda as the chieftain of the South. After helping defeat the first nationalist attack, Aang attended the international meeting organised by Hakoda. But Galak and his allies would use this opportunity to strike again. But luckily, Aang and Katara were able to prevent him from kidnapping Hakoda. Regardless, the nationalists did end up capturing King Kwei, which would lead to a tense prison exchange at the Bridge of No Return. The fighting quickly erupted and the nationalists were defeated. Shortly after, Aang and his friends ventured to the Earth and Fire Refinery, discovering that a city named the Crane Fish Town had emerged around it. The Avatar was then asked by Lao Beifong to help solve the disputes between the Benders and the non-Benders at the settlement. Later, when several non-Bender owned factories, including the Earth and Fire Refinery, were sabotaged, Team Avatar decided to investigate. Aang and his friends discovered that Councilwoman Li Ling was organizing a Bender supremacy movement. They captured her after infiltrating her secret rally. However, Aang was consequently faced with a bigger problem, as Toph urged him to take away Li Ling's bending, in order to put an end to her movement, a fate considered worse than death for Li Ling. Before he could decide, Li Ling escaped and started an armed uprising. The Avatar then helped put down the insurgency and ultimately decided against removing the supremacist bending, believing that this would not resolve any of the conflict that they were facing. Aang and Katara then decided to stay in Cranefish Town, regarding it as a special place and wanting to help it develop into a better community. After the 100-Year War and the tensions surrounding the Harmony Restoration movement, Aang managed to maintain peace together with Fire Lord Zuko and the rest of his friends. He transformed all the former Fire Nation colonies into the United Republic of Nations. Cranefish Town, renamed Republic City, became the new state capital and home for people from all nations. Aang worked closely with Zuko to allow Republic City to grow into the prosperous and safe environment that we soon see it become. Later, in his efforts to revive air nomad culture, Aang searched the ruins of the air temples for information. He also attempted to maintain his people's cuisine by reconstructing old recipes based off his memories and the badly damaged texts that he had found in the temples. This task was made more difficult by the fact that several special vegetables and fruits grown by the air nomads had gone extinct, forcing him to use ingredients from the other nations. Later, Aang restored the 4 ancient air temples and constructed a 5th air temple near the heart of Republic City, called Air Temple Island. This is also where he housed a herd of surviving flying bison, along with a new type of winged lemur, the ring-tailed winged lemur, both of which he had found sometime after the war. Sometime during this period, Aang married Katara and had 3 children, Bumi, a non-bender who gained the ability to airbend in 171 AG, Kaya, who was a waterbender, and Tenzin, who was an airbender. When Tenzin turned 5, Aang began to collect a series of stories and mementos about his life for his youngest son to read following his death. Later, in his efforts to preserve air nomad culture, he spent more time away and travelled more extensively with Tenzin, his only airbending child. This was so he could instill him with all the air nomad traditions. This would obviously lead to the elder siblings feeling somewhat distant from their dad. In 128 AG, the city was suffering from a high rate of crime from a notorious crime boss named Yukong. Given that Yukong was a master bloodbender and very hard to catch, Aang found it necessary to assist Toph in his arrest. Aang, Toph, and her metal-bending officers apprehended the crime lord at Kwang's cuisine. The criminal did not resist, and despite Aang saying that he knew he was a bloodbender, Yukong claimed that he would beat the charges against him. Aang was also present at Yukong's trial, where he was convicted of all his crimes. However, before the sentence could be carried out, Yukong used his powers to subdue everyone in the courtroom, leaving them unconscious. Aang was capable of holding out the longest, but even he eventually lost consciousness as well, after which Yukong used his skill to levitate the Avatar and throw him against the stairs. Aang then activated his Avatar state and regained his senses, allowing him to pursue the criminal. He effectively halted Yukong's getaway by severing the mount from the carriage. But surprisingly, Aang was subdued a second time by Yukong's bloodbending. He now fully intended intended to kill Aang, but Aang then entered the Avatar state once again and was able to break free of Yukong's grip. He then swiftly captured Yukong in the Earth shell and used his energy bending to permanently remove Yukong's bending. Later in the mid-130s AG, Tenzin was arrested after apprehending some Vandals at the docks of the Republic City. The Avatar then came to the police headquarters and apologized to Toph. He asked to take charge of Tenzin and the Vandals, to which he was allowed. Tenzin apologized as they flew back on Appa, but Aang reassured him that he could never do anything to disappoint him. Aang then introduced Tenzin to conflict meditation in the style of the air nomads. He noted to Katara that it would not be as easy as this all the time, but Katara noted that Tenzin is still very young and he should be given the easy problems first before the harder ones. It is then revealed that the 100 years Aang spent frozen in the iceberg while in the Avatar state drained much of his inherent life energy, and by his later years the strain had begun to weigh heavily upon his body. With his health failing and sensing that his end was near, Aang tasked the Order of the White Lotus to search for the next Avatar and protect them until they were ready. Eventually, at the relatively young biological age of 66, Aang passed away, and was later reincarnated into the headstrong, rebellious girl named Korra, who hailed from the Southern Water Tribe. A massive statue of Avatar Aang was created on Aang's Memorial Island. The statue depicts a teenage Aang wearing air nomad monk robes and holding a staff with an airbending symbol at the top. He is seen standing overlooking a city that he and his friends had founded. Also, as in tradition, a statue of Aang was added to the inner sanctuary of the Southern Air Temple. I really hope you enjoyed this video on the life of Avatar Aang. It took a very long time to put together, so I really hope you appreciate it and leave us a like down below. Also, tell us in the comments if you made it to the very end, because that really means a lot to me. But with that, that's going to do it for me in this video. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and peace.